2/3 of a person. That's the line I missed the first time we ran this episode. Lydia got to talking an hour or so in about a near-death epic in the Garhwal Himalaya, the year before she became the first woman to climb Everest without bottled oxygen. She and her partner had been buried in 6 avalanches, and they had maybe 24 hours before the cold killed them. And in the middle of that, almost in passing, almost as if she didn't know what she was saying, she described the thing that kept them alive. They did not blame. Not the storm, not the route, not each other. And because they did not blame, each of them could bring what was left of themselves to the problem. 2/3 of a person plus 2/3 of a person, she said, was enough to get down the mountain. I didn't hear it at the time, and I hear it now, and that sentence is one of the through lines of this whole show. So what I want you to listen for on this re-release isn't Lydia's Everest story. That story is well told, but it is not, in the end, the most interesting thing she has to say. What I want you to listen for is the moment a young woman on the side of a giant Himalayan peak that is trying to kill her decides that the only resource she has left is the choice not to collapse into blame. Listen for the moment that decision becomes the architecture of an entire life. When we first recorded this, I thought agency was a gift the mountain gives you. I'm not sure that's right anymore. What I've come to believe, and what the rest of this season kept telling me in one voice after another, is that agency is not the mountain's gift. The mountain is just a place where the agency you already had becomes visible to you. What you do with it after that on the long descent that is the rest of your life, that is the actual work. And Lydia has been doing that work for 38 years. And I think she knew on the side of that mountain what I am only now beginning to understand. So listen for the moment and tell me, what did you hear? If you're enjoying the show and want to take the next step in your training, join our newsletter and receive a free 4-week sample training plan. Head on over to uphillathlete.com/letsgo, and once you sign up, you'll instantly get a link to try out some of our most popular training plans. It's a great way to get a feel for how we train our athletes for big mountain goals. Check it out at uphillathlete.com/letsgo. That's uphillathlete.com/LETSGO. From Uphill Athlete, I am founder and CEO Steve House, and this is Voice of the Mountains, where we explore the philosophy and humanity of mountain sports. This is where we ask ourselves who we are, what we learn, and who we want to become as a result of our adventures. This is Voice of the Mountains. It is my great privilege to have Lydia Bradey joining me today. Lydia is a world-class climber and mountain guide who fell in love with climbing as a teenager in her native New Zealand. She quickly rose through the climbing ranks and did a lot of first ascents worldwide, from Yosemite Valley to the United States to Pakistan, China, and the Antarctic Peninsula. One of her crowning achievements came in 1988 when she became the first woman to climb Everest without supplemental oxygen. Lydia is a physiotherapist, an acupuncturist, an inspirational speaker, and a sought-after ski and climbing guide. She has led groups in Europe, Kashmir, and Kyrgyzstan, and she has guided her guests to the top of Everest no less than 6 times, more than any other woman in history. For her contributions to climbing, she was appointed an Officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit at the 2020 New Year's Honors. I don't know, do you have a title I should use, Lydia? Or should I call you Lydia, Madame, Your Highness?
No, Highness is way too high.
I mean, from the top of Everest, I don't know. It doesn't get higher than that.
Really? No, I think we'll work on that on the podcast.
Okay, great. We'll work on your title. Lydia published her book, Going Up is Easy, in 2015, recounting her accomplishments and the challenges she faced in her several decades of climbing. Lydia, it's really great to have you. Welcome to Voice of the Mountains.
Thank you. Oh, thank you for inviting me to come and join you on this quite inspirational sounding podcast.
Yeah, it's a different kind of adventure. It's a little bit more of an adventure in ideas and reflection and vulnerability and sharing. And I think that I have a feeling that you have a lot to share with our audience. Before I ask the first question, I want to just sort of be honest right out of the gate. The reason I had you here is that I'm fascinated by pioneers, and you have been a pioneer simply by how you've lived your life, but also how you've climbed over many years. I did hard climbs in my career, things that people thought were impossible, but there's a huge difference between doing something that people say you cannot do and doing something that people say you should not do. And you have been a person that has sort of systematically, it seems like, in what I see from your career and your life, dismissed the should nots and just been more of a why not kind of gal. I think, does that reflect, or does that, how does that land for you? Am I reading too much into your personality? I mean, we've only just met, we've never met in real life. But when I, remember seeing you on the cover of Summit magazine in 1988, with an article about your climb and so on. I was a 17-year-old kid, really interested in mountaineering and climbing. And I was just like, like you had gone to the moon for me.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you. When you're reading this out, I sort of feel as if you're describing somebody else. I've not had the huge first ascent list that quite a lot of people have had. But thank you. Perhaps I've done a few things in the Himalayas in my early days that I maybe shouldn't have done. But when I'm going to riposte with a question so that I can answer your question more specifically. And that is, when you say should not, do you mean should not in social terms? Like I didn't have a permit to climb the route that I was on Everest, for example?
I didn't know about that. What I was thinking about was that you should not climb Everest without oxygen.
Oh, okay.
I mean, 1988 was only 10 years after 1978 when Reinhold and Peter climbed it without oxygen for the first time. And they had been told that they were going to come down and be vegetables for the rest of their lives. And, I don't know how many people had climbed Everest without supplemental oxygen between 1978 and 1988, but I bet it wasn't very many. And, that still feels very much like a place, I mean, let's go back to 1988 for that matter. Like,
okay.
It was very different in these, and I think, I can say, like, I was there too, but as a young man, it was chauvinistic, and the attitude towards women was evolving, but it was better. It was different. I don't want to make this about your gender either. I want to make this about your experience, but your gender is one dimension of your being and your personality and who you are. And you must have been having people tell you that you shouldn't do these things like climb Everest without bottled oxygen.
Well, it was quite funny because on Everest, we were a joint New Zealand-Slovak expedition. And as you say, the politics, the way of climbing, everything was quite different. For example, in the olden days, or the golden days, then, you had a liaison officer always. You still have a liaison officer. But in those days, and you'll know this, your liaison officer was there in case you couldn't climb the route that you were wanting to climb. In Pakistan, these Americans changed the route on Gasherbrum 1 because the glacier below the beginning of their route had been mined because there was on border disputes between Pakistan and India. and that's a good reason. And so the liaison officer gave them permit like that. And so, so the things were dynamic, and actually decisions were made in that space. However, we did go to Everest with the ambition to climb it without oxygen. This is me and my New Zealand team, and the Slovak team also had the intention to climb Everest without oxygen. They had a much greater heritage in climbing than we had, and a different route in mind, the southwest face of Everest. So the only to our face you shouldn't climb Everest without oxygen was just that sort of general, well, good luck, but it's pretty hard. Who knows what's going to happen? I hope she'll be all right. I'm sure people said that and discussed it, but we were pretty strong. I mean, in those days, the French, everyone shared fixing of ropes on Everest, and so the French and another team, they fixed the ropes through the icefall, which the icefall was much smaller because there was more ice. So I think it was as maybe at least half of disrupted terrain, and we largely fixed the ropes on the Lhotse face. So I was fixing the ropes on Lhotse face for the Voie Normale, a normal route, with the Slovaks, and so we got strong. People were carrying loads in those days. We were carrying loads up to Camp 1 and Camp 2. I mean, we had 4 Sherpas and 9 climbers and 2 different routes. So, I think maybe it was more of a vibe of possibilities. And that's not saying that the people who go to Everest now don't have that. That's not saying that the people in the world who are climbing don't have that. It's just that probably they go to other places where there's more of a vibe of possibilities, which is now why you're seeing, people turning up to Annapurna, men and women, and climbing it in 15 days without oxygen. The vibe of possibilities has shifted, as it does in all climbing, whether it's rock or ice skating or traveling to the moon. Yeah, it's just human. And what I think drives this is curiosity. So everyone is a climber at base camp in 1988. When I started guiding, and this is just a wee sort of sortie into the future, if you like, when I started guiding and I was at Everest Base Camp, and I was like, I met a team, and they were Italian, and they were there to try to climb Everest without oxygen or something like this. Or another team was there to try the West Ridge, and I was like really inspired, and I came back to my guiding posse, my big expedition with quite a few guides, and there was a total disinterest. And I was like, how can you be disinterested? This is really exciting. This is people trying really, really hard, and it's going to be really interesting. But there was a whole guiding world, and they're interested in other guides and how other guides are doing it, and the ethics of how they're doing it, and the strategy of how they're getting their clients up. They're fascinated by that, but they weren't engaged by climbers being on Everest. So there was this 2 different worlds, and I was kind of standing at the crossroads going left and right, just going, this is amazing. So,
that's really interesting.
Change, yeah. And then on a micro level, we these guys on my expedition, these Slovaks, I said, when I met them on the walk-in to Everest, so funny, and I go to Peter Bozek, who had just put up the magic line on K2 in 86, wasn't it? When all the 50% of the people on K2 died in a big bad year, and I said, I didn't know that at the time, and I go, hi, and have you been to the Himalayas before? And he goes, we do new route, south face, blah blah blah. We do new route, east peak, Kanchenjunga. We do new route, and everywhere he'd gone to 8,000 meter peaks, he'd done a first ascent. Yeah, and so they were experienced. Then, as the expedition went by, they'd occasionally they'd throw out a line like, mountains not a good place for women. Then they go, but you very strong, and I'd be going, yes, I've earned my place. And so it was super interesting that this very chauvinistic, if you like, cohort of men, there were 4 climbers, Slovak climbers, and 2 of them, they were really nice, but they were sort of quite staidly chauvinistic, if you like, as were my New Zealand team. But the other 2, I made 2 of the best friends I'd ever made in my life. It's Peter Bozek with the Magic Line in K2 and this guy called Yaro Yasko, much younger. And they were funny and they were curious. And this is what connected it. And if you say what drove you to climb Everest without oxygen, people ask that, of course. And I just go, well, I'm a climber to begin with. So climbers are always curious about things and could it go in the area which is your strength. And my strength was just the plod. I'm a high altitude hiker. I could plod my way up and I could plod my way down and I could look after myself on a steep snow slope and keep going and keep going and keep going. So there's my strength. Technically, I'm not a whiz kid. I'm not, super hardcore. I have to do things cerebrally and not, and sort of endurance-y, but not super techy. And so that's my strength. And then I could explore the mountain world in that way. So they were curious about their climb and I was curious about that climb. And it's this curiosity that drives the whole, that drives this questions of your podcast, what are we, what do we learn and where do we want to go with our lives?
Yeah. So, I mean, thank you for that. I mean, there's a bunch of things that you just said that I'd love to follow up on. I want to start by saying that the little line of prose, the muse, if you will, for our episode today is that good journeys end with your understanding of yourself shifted. And, I think that this is one of the things that unites mountain people. I don't care if you label yourself a plotter or a sport climber or a mountain runner or whatever it is that, you, as you said, you're curious. And what is it, do you think, tell me more about that. Like, what is it that you're actually curious about, do you think? I mean, curiosity is a broad thing. Is it that, you're curious, you say you're a climber, you're just curious as to what you can climb and how much, or what is the curiosity?
I think the curiosity is always shifting and it's a really dynamic, it's a thing, So one day when I go sport climbing, when I come to America, I'll be curious about, how I'll do on that rock or I mean, and you know this. I mean, you're curious. That's why you have this podcast, because it gives you authority to ask people a whole lot of things. So it's an approach, and I don't think I'm telling you this. I'm just saying it, because I know you already know it. But it's an approach that I think is one of the biggest things that we can give people if you've got children or people that you mentor or people who seek inspiration. It's just like, you have it. Just start with curiosity. And other people call it engagement. Or in order to learn from you, in order to be curious, you need to engage, and you just get so much more back. To take it down to a microscopic level and to apply it to my ascent of Everest in 1988. I remember sitting at Camp 3 on the west face of Lhotse, just looking up at the upper slopes of Everest above the South Col. And I'd been to 8,000 meters on Gesheprom 2 the year before, alpine style, but only going from advanced base camp. So I can't say that I climbed alpine style, and feeling really strong. And I'm just going, look at this. It's just a simple mountain. It's a simple New Zealand mountain. It's a, snow and rock, and you walk up the snow and la-di-da. But there's this big challenge up there, and it's invisible. And it's how hard can it be? And it's not like, oh, how hard can it be? It's like, well, it's got to change. It's going to change. It changes when I get to 8,000 meters. What's it going to be like? How will I react? How can I manage it? What's it going to be like? What's it going to be like? What's it going to be like? So it was just this massive curiosity because I'd set myself up really well. I wasn't having to deal with, oh, I haven't drunk enough, or, oh, I'm not fit enough, or I'm not acclimatized enough. Everything was pretty fat. I was feeling good, and I was really strong. And so it was a luxury to be able to look up there and go, oh, how hard can it be? Not how hard can it be, but what's it going to be like?
I love that. But, what is it about your mindset that said, how hard can it be, instead of how hard can it be? What is it?
I think I'm going, how hard can it be?
Okay.
So it's, that's a really, it's not like, I can do this. I mean,
right.
how hard
Okay.
can it be? Absolutely not that.
Right. Okay.
It's kind of going with, the curiosity thing is, what's it going to be like? How hard will it be? Gosh, English language, how hard will it be? And then what's it? Well, I am lucky enough to grow up with somebody who encouraged my curiosity, and I've always seen it as a thing. We come back to this again. I've always seen it as a thing. So I treasure it, I value it, as opposed to being there going, I can't think how hard, I shouldn't think how hard will it be. I should just think, I can do it. They're just different motivating factors. I mean, you've got to pull on that drive of, I can do this, or I can do this and get down, or I can get down from here. You've got to draw on that anyway, because you need to motivate. There's so much motivation and discomfort.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that was very often something that I have said to myself in my climbing, where it's like, yeah, I can get down from here. So why can't I just go a little bit higher? And I think that is one of those tricks. An analogy would be, I've used this with in-person coaching in the weight gym before, when I know or just with my training partners in the past when I used to train a lot, and they would be like, okay, put such and such a weight on, and it would be maybe close to their PR, but not over. And I put more on without telling them, and it would be a personal record for them, and they would do it. Because if they had known mentally that, oh, this is a personal record, it would have created all this anxiety, and it would have reduced, and they wouldn't have, they would have self-sabotaged, right? So when you have that, that's a great mindset to have, where you're like, yeah, I'm okay right now, and I can get myself out of the situation for the foreseeable future, everything I can foresee happening up there. And then you can sort of, maybe it's a trick, maybe it's not, but you can sort of trick yourself into like trying a little more when you, especially when you're at the end of your rope and you're like, nah, I'm still okay. Like, I'm at the end of my rope, but what difference if it make if I go 50 meters more? Like, it'll be fine. Like, it doesn't actually change anything. I might as well go 50 meters more, and then you might as well go another 50 meters. I might as well go, and then then you're on top.
Yeah. Well, it's more than a trick. It's a method to stay alive. If you don't keep checking that you can get down from here, then it's more like you are tricking yourself as well, aren't you? It's like, oh, everything will be all right. Can I get down from here? Yeah, I can get down from here. Okay, let's go. And then you've got your motivation, what's going to drive you forward, but you've got your self-preservation and survival instinct. I think that too is key. If we encourage ourselves, if we encourage society or people or our children or whatever to be curious or moving forward, you also need to encourage them that it's cool, that it's okay to make sure that you can get down. And then, and this is where the craft of mountaineering, or the craft of gardening, if you like, or the craft of being an athlete, or even a writer, is, people who are great at something, or people who are great craftspeople, are really good at doing the monotonous everyday things well. They're really good at checking their harness, their belay loop, if you like, or they're really good at buddy checking, or they're really good at making sure their crampons are sharp, because, when you get on terrain that the ice is very, very hard, you do need a sharp pair of crampons. Those sorts of things, those kind of everyday things that can be seen as boring, but the people who are really good at the front end are often really, really good at those sorts of things, and they do them really quickly and they do them really well. And they don't stop doing them because they're number one. They just keep doing them, and then they push they do all their risk stuff at the top end.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great insight, and I think that is so true. Yeah, who you said something that triggered my curiosity. Who was that person for you that encouraged your curiosity?
Oh, my mother, because that's all I had in my family. I didn't have any brothers and sisters, or I didn't have a bigger brother. And I didn't have a father. I mean, my parents separated when I was being born. Yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
she was really, and she brought me up to not. She brought me up so I wasn't the person she was, because she didn't have a very nice childhood. So in the end, we were very, very different people. But she did a pretty good job, except that she knew I was a bit of a wild child. She thought I'd get into really, really big trouble when I was a teenager, because I had a proverbial chip on my shoulder. Whatever, half of us do, and the other half don't. They're lucky, or whatever.
Yeah, or unlucky, depending on the perspective, right? Like,
you have to expose yourself a little.
Yeah, well, one of the mutual friends that I called upon when I was knew I was going to talk to you was Guy Cotter. And this was exactly one of the things the guy said. He was like, he was a bit of a wild child in her youth. He didn't expound on that, and I didn't ask him to. But where the question that came to my mind and what I actually wrote down along with that note is, if that's part of why you seek these journeys. I mean, your journeys happen to be in the mountains, and you've already alluded to, these different kinds of crafts, whether it's writing or other sports or whatever. Did this chip on your shoulder? Did this inner wild child, was that somebody who drove you to do things like go to Yosemite? I don't know. When did you go to Yosemite? Like paint that for me. You were like 18, 19, something like that. You show up in Yosemite Valley and teach and find some people and go climb some big walls.
Yeah, that was the best thing to do when you were I was 19.
100%. 100%.
Oh my God, it's so good. So those days, of course, there wasn't sport climbing. And
what year was it?
Sport climbing. Oh, it was in 1981.
There was not sport climbing.
Well, anyway, there certainly wasn't sport climbing in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I wasn't, as you know from reading my writing to me and reading my book, I was really bad at sports. So I wasn't strong. I mean, my legs were strong, and the rest of me wasn't very strong. And I wasn't gymnastic. Like I couldn't do a handstand, even against the wall. And my hand eye coordination. I didn't really catch balls very well. And I didn't learn fast in those areas either. And so, failure. And so
Wait, whose voice was that? This failure. Whose voice was that?
My voice, of course.
Okay.
But also, you're a kid, if
yeah.
It's not necessarily even a voice. It's just an experience of being last. Yeah. And teased because I kind of walked funny. I was a little bit wonky, and not wonky, was stiff, whatever. And I was teased for walking funny, and things like that. Formative moments.
Yes.
However, by the time I had discovered the mountains, or no, I should say when I discovered mountains through what we call tramping, which is hiking, but off-trail hiking. So it's pretty full-on hiking. And then I realized that there was other ways to achieve goals that you may not even be able to describe because you were young and inexperienced, but physical goals. So I could be a physical person in this new environment because I had other skills, and doing a handstand and catching a ball wasn't that important. And people seemed to forgive me if I wasn't very brave at down climbing and things like this. And I got stronger and stronger, and I became better and better. And I also found out that so much of that is social, because when you go in the mountains, you are living with people, you are managing your experience with, I was, with one other person or two other people or three other people, depending on who you are hiking or tramping or mountaineering with. And therefore it's partly become social. And so you're bringing other skills in, and those lessons are about, say, if you like, achieving a goal, which might becoming a physical person, or recognizing you can achieve a goal via a different route. Okay. So then this concept has opened a massive door. La-di-da, go mountaineering, go to Alaska, because everyone in New Zealand was going to Peru, so I decided to go to Alaska because it was more interesting. I didn't know anything about it. And then come down through the lower 48 into Yosemite, and I'd done a little bit of rock climbing at Squamish, and I wasn't very brave, but one person had, if you like, taken me on a wall that was A1, and the Grand Wall, one of the routes on was A1 or something like this, maybe A2. And I realized there was another way to be up there. And when I got to Yosemite, and it was all about big walls, and of course, and people would talk about being up there, and then they'd come down, they'd have these experiences and these stories, and experiences and stories were really what drove me as well. And not stories so that I could tell, but stories that are inside of me. And so I realized that through aid climbing, I could get up there. It's just a different route, a different way to experience this and have these same experiences as my friends. Yeah, so I started aid climbing, and
what's the difference between a story and a journey and an experience?
Oh, well, everything's an experience. Like having a wasabi ice cream could be considered an experience. Well,
that's definitely an experience.
No, it's actually not a very it's not a particularly interesting experience.
Okay,
sounds interesting.
Sounds interesting. Yeah,
so what do
they got my. They got my $2.
That's pretty boring, actually. So,
Noted.
you go think, oh, this will be an experience. Oh, actually, it's not much of an experience. It's the same as watching a movie, isn't it? Oh, this could be, I really love watching this person's movies. Oh, well, it wasn't as good an experience. That's the whole way of well, hang on. What was the thing? Experience? What were you?
Journeys and stories. You were talking about like people would go up on these walls and come back with experiences and stories, and you wanted these stories within yourself, and just trying to figure out if that's the same
Yeah. Don't you think
thing I'm talking about?
Don't you think a whole lot of experiences add up into a journey, and sometimes those journeys make good stories?
Actually, most of the time.
Most of the time. Yes.
Maybe
Most
all
of
the time.
Well, it depends on honestly, it depends on to whom you're speaking. Now,
Sure.
here we go to situations where in the world where, say, climbing Mount. Let's use the parallel of climbing Mount Everest, or the example of climbing Mount Everest. Climbing Mount Everest can be done in lots of ways. You can either be unassisted, which means you don't use fixed ropes, and then you could climb it and climb it without oxygen, or climb it by a different route. Like all these different routes on Everest used to be climbed all the time, like North's route, and then the Pinnacles got done, and then all these different. The Southwest Face got climbed a couple of times, or 3 times actually, didn't it? I'm sure maybe more than that.
Yeah, there was the Australian route that those guys did on the north side.
The White Limbo. Yep.
White Limbo.
Yep. I know. All these people used to climb all these different routes, and not that many people climbing all these different routes anymore. So there's plenty of room. Anyway, their experience climbing a different route or a new route, or even repeating an old route without oxygen and without support would be really, really different. And when you go to some countries, like you go to Georgia, I went to Georgia last year. We have some Georgian friends we met on the Tian Shan. Wonderful, wonderful people and very good climbers. And when you go there, or you meet these people in the Tian Shan or in the Pamir or something like this, and then and they're from Poland or they're from Georgia or something like that, they know what it means if you have climbed Everest without oxygen. But you go to a more Western type of place, less European. If you go to a place that's less European, then the less European or Eastern European it is, the less do people differentiate in how you climb something. That's really big like that. Yeah. I don't know where I am there. Also, they won't ask you about your journey. And to them, they won't expect that you'll have a story, because they just want to know, what are like standing on top. Whereas a Euro or a Eastern Bloc or an Eastern European person will go, well, what route did you take, and what were the conditions like, and how long did it take you, and how many people were you, and
they dig into the story, like they dig into the experience, the journey.
Yeah, they see that there is a story there, because there has to be.
Yeah. How did the journey of climbing Everest in 1988 shift your understanding of yourself?
Oh, well, slowly or quickly, perhaps.
Start with slowly.
No, maybe I should start with the short. The fast learnings were how I did at super altitude, because that's what I called it. No one called it the death zone. What a
can we please go back to super altitude? I like that way better than the death zone.
I know, it's super. Yeah, super is such a great word. Super altitude and the death zone. Yeah, well, there's for some people, but so's the street.
Yeah.
like what?
Yeah.
So's being in your 90s.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Sorry.
So the short learnings were that you did well at super altitude.
The short learnings were things, and sometimes they're learnings that you reaffirm. For example, what I was going to say way back was when I started tramping, hiking without trails, and when I started mountaineering, I realized that I could hang out with the people who were really experienced, and they were happy to spend time with me and give me their time. And therefore I could learn a lot from them, and also achieve better than on my own if I pulled my share of the chores. So, you know, I'll go and collect more snow because they're basically making the decisions. So you have to recognize what they bring, have to honor it, and you bring what you can. And I'm funny sometimes. Okay. I mean, and people like to laugh and they like to wake up and then goof off rather than wake up and then have seriousness in the tent and melting the snow. And, you know, it's cool to create stories. And so if you can give this to people, you can give your positivity to them, then they can give what they have, and it's an exchange, you know, and they realize you've gone outside and got more snow, or you've dug the tent out, or you've melted more snow than anyone else because they're better and they do their stuff. So you bring this to now where were we?
But no, will we stop on that for a second? Because I think that is such a great analogy for so many things, right? Like you could be talking about being a young mountain guide, you know, or you could be talking about being a junior doctor working with a senior doctor that's been practicing for 35 years, or physiotherapy, if you're a young physiotherapist or a veteran. You know, I think that I wish somebody had spelled it out for me like that when I was young. You know, I mean, I know what you're going to say, but and maybe I wouldn't have heard it. You're probably right. But maybe I would have. Maybe I would have been like, you know what? That's right. Like I need to bring more snow. I need to do more of the dirty work because I need to realize that these people bring more of the experience or making the decisions. And you don't actually realize that until later, right? Like if I reflect on my first expedition when I was 20, I went to Nanga Parbat with a very experienced group of people, 5 of whom had climbed 8,000 meter peaks. You know, Maria Frantar, I don't know, did you ever cross paths with Maria Frantar? She'd climbed 5 and 8,000 meter peaks, all without supplemental oxygen. She died on Kanchenjunga in 1992, sadly. But, you know, she was leading our team, fixing the ropes, making the decisions. And I didn't realize that until later, like years later.
And what a moment when you realize this, though. You were always going to realize it, and perhaps you were just gaining in so many other ways. You can only grow a certain amount, you know. And if maybe you're going to be world class at something from zero, from doing a paper round to, you know, climbing super hardcore. I mean, Nanga Parbat and you're 20, that's rad.
Well, I mean, I was part of a 18-member expedition. So this is actually really a testament to the Slovenian Alpine Association and how they ran their expeditions for many, many years. And it's another story how I became a member of the Slovenian Alpine Association, and I spent a year there as a student, and I earned the alpinist status. And what that meant was that I got invited on all the expeditions that the Alpine Association put together. And the way they built teams was they deliberately, I was one of 2 20-year-olds, you know, and then we had 5 people who had climbed 8,000 meter peaks like Makalu, Everest, Kanchenjunga, you know, big, hard mountains. And we were such a mix, right? And that's how they mentored. That's how so much of what we learned was just around the cook stove, you know, and around the bowl of French fries and around the teapot. That's where I actually learned the most on that trip.
You've put the nail on the head for me for my Everest expedition, and also for K2 and a lot, because I hung out with some Slovenians there, such hardcore, and then my Slovaks were so hardcore, and yet you learned so much from them. But you had to already have a humble corner of your stroppy 20-year-old brain to go, yeah, I can learn a whole lot from these guys. You were probably so busy learning, you didn't quite put it into perspective of some things. But hey, you know, you're already so busy learning. Yeah, and you got invited, so you weren't a totally boring person to be with. Or you could be. I don't know. What were you like when you were 20?
I think I was actually pretty quiet for the most part. And I was in awe of these people most of the time and in awe of that place for all the time and feeling very much like an imposter 99% of the time. And, frankly, I mean, that is also a reason I did bring a lot of snow. I never took the lead. I never did anything by the front of the team. I was always in the back carrying the loads, setting, doing that work. And I was completely happy. I was so honored to be able to do that. Like, please just let me carry a load for you. Like, I never had any fantasy about going to the top of the mountain. It was just like to be there and to be with those people, was what it was about for me. But I want to go back to the, kind of digging in. So these were the short term, what you became after Everest was some of these things. But you said there was also some long term.
Well,
I mean, is this what we're talking? Are we segueing into that?
Oh, yeah.
But, so the fallout, I mean, I didn't want to make it, and I would like you to just describe, the fallout as you put it. Very briefly, because I don't want this talk to be about that. I want this to be about, but that was certainly part of your journey, part of your experience of Everest was having, especially the years to follow.
It was a type 4 fun, the never sounded like a good idea at the time, wasn't very good to deal with. But stories make it's formative. Yeah, well, I think the best thing, especially for people who don't know the story, and God, how many times have I been asked the story, and this is not you because you totally get it, but often it obscures the fact that, hey, I did a cool climb.
Yeah.
I don't just want to talk about but it was a hashtag me too. It was a hashtag me too situation. I set myself up. I was a bit of a wild child. I was the one who, I didn't sleep with the right people. And I slept with the wrong people. And I was a little bit of a rule breaker. I climbed an 8,000 meter peak without a permit because I had changed from Gasherbrum 1 to Gasherbrum 2 the year before. And just at the last minute with some Basques and so on and so forth. So I was kind of upbeat and I made, as Rob Hall, the guy who the Everest movie was made about, largely, as he said, I always hung out with the cool people. I didn't see that. I just hung out with the people who had that really positive approach and opened the door for people who carried the loads. Exactly what you were talking about on Nanga Parbat. And I want to segue back to this, not right now, but I'd like to touch back on that doing the stuff in the background in order to learn the stuff in the foreground is what entitlement obscures the opportunity to do that. So if you feel that you're entitled to be there or you're entitled to have something, that whole concept of entitlement and second generation wealth, this, as mountain guides have seen a lot, it obscures your opportunity to be part of this learning and growing team. It's actually a disability. But anyway, so but the fallout was my New Zealand teammates who hadn't been successful on their final attempt on Everest, and I descended to base camp to sit out a storm. And remember, there was no weather forecasting in those days. So was the storm going to be 1 day or 5 days? So by going back down to base camp, it's quite strenuous. Go to camp 2 to base camp to camp 2. Less so in those days than nowadays because the icefall was shorter, but still the same altitude gain. Well, then they had failed, and they were really ambitious. They'd started this idea that they might open do the 7 summits in a year or whatever it was, or 2 years or whatever. And so they stated that it wasn't possible that I'd summited Everest. And of course, it's a male-dominated society, as it still is, of course. and la-di-da. And so things went really pear-shaped after I got down from the summit. To add to it, 50% of my expedition died, which are all the Slovaks. They died on the descent from down the normal route from climbing the southwest face of Everest, alpine style, and without oxygen. So, yes, that was formative few years.
Did they die? Were you party to that in any way, or was that happened after you were already down and out?
Yeah. So
I'm sorry to.
Oh no, that's
right. You
right.
found out several days later, or
yeah. So I summited. So we all went up. New Zealanders were already at Camp 2, 6,450 meters, 6.5. Then I went down. I decided when the storm started, went up for our summit attempt. The storm started. Remember, no weather forecasting. And then the next morning, it's still storming. And I go, I'm going to decide. I'm going to go back down to base camp. And I was sharing a tent with one Slovak because there was no room in the New Zealand tent. I mean, we were all a shared expedition.
Yeah,
but he didn't really speak. It was Peter, this really good friend. But at the same time, he didn't speak much English. And so I had no idea what their decisions were. But I knew their decisions were really sound because they were really, Peter was he was graphing his ascent and descent, and he was really scientific in a simple way, super scientific about his climbing, and I could learn so much from him. So I decided that I needed to go down, and I can't stay healthy at 6,500 meters. There's like cooking a little bit of water in your tent, and then I made that decision myself, and then I found out that the Slovaks had decided that they would also go down, and I like, yes, I've made the right decision. They confirmed my decision, which I remember just being a moment of just like, I'm getting there, I'm learning, I'm making sound decisions, and then the other New Zealanders stayed up there. So 5 days later, I went down, had my 27th birthday, came back up again. Other New Zealanders were pretty tired. They probably weren't hydrated enough. They didn't have quite enough food. They attempted Everest via a route we didn't have a permit for, turned around that day. They left camp really late, like 9 in the morning or something. And by that time, we got to Camp 2 from base camp at 10, just after 10 o'clock in the morning. I mean, we were going pretty fast in those days.
Yeah.
I think my fastest time to Camp 2 from base camp was 4 hours 20 or something. But that's because that's moving. Yeah, but it's not today's icefall. It's a much faster. It's only a third of the distance, I reckon. So, I mean, the broken stuff. So, anyway, so they went down. They said, we're out of here. And so I was a day behind them. And then I left the next morning for the normal route, Ed Hillary route, Southwest Ridge. And the Slovaks didn't go up on the southwest face because it was too windy. So they were one day behind me. I summited. They were already on the mountain. Their stove had broken and Dusan wasn't very well. And the conditions were super hard. So Peter has said to me, if we spend 2 nights on the mountain on the southwest face, we are okay. If we spend 3 nights, we are in a problem. And they were having to spend 3 nights. And then when they summited, one person summited, Peter turned around to help Yarrow, his teammate, and because Yarrow was getting hypoxic blindness, and he turned around from above the Hillary step or at the Hillary step, came back down, and then they all got hit by a storm and died. By that time, I was already between Camp 2 and base camp. I talked to them at Camp 2 on the radio, and they said, congratulations. And I was just, and then by the time I got to base camp, everyone was peeking out because they hadn't heard from them.
And so you're managing, you come off of this climb, you're managing, first of all, that you just climbed Everest without supplemental oxygen. I mean, that's incredible. That's just an incredible achievement by any measure.
Without
for
ropes
anyone.
From the South Col. No ropes above
the South Col either.
A little rope, one little rope on the Hillary step, one little rope, but not on the traverse around it, and a piece of parachute cord on this other. No, seriously, it was like, ooh. But on this steeper section just above the balcony, but just
you're better off not touching that, right? Like
it's like, oh, I touched it. Yeah.
So you've just accomplished this, and which is just all kinds of incredible. And then you are also managing your friends that you've made on this trip that you are speaking very highly of. You clearly cared a lot for them. Go missing, they're gone. Then you have people saying that there's no way you could have done what you say you did.
Yeah,
You don't.
Those people were Rob and Gary and Bill. Really, then they went out. The Slovaks. There was Ivan Fiala, who was the leader. They were dealing with a massive tragedy. I mean, he was investigated by the police in Slovakia because it was occupied by Russia. It's a really big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd lost his friends, his really big friends. It was just awful for him for years. And he never really overcame that grief. But they didn't question my ascent. They were just super stoked. Let's see. But it was the New Zealanders, and then it was the reporters, and then that's where the ripple came from. Yeah.
And this is all part of your journey. And this journey shifted a lot in you, I can imagine. I mean, any one of those things would affect someone indelibly, right?
No, I was pretty lucky that, obviously, I guess, terms like I went into a dark space, I obviously got depressed, if you like, but, and not but, it was pretty horrible having people say that you're a liar. There were two things going on is that, I wanted to go back and climb. And in those days, you either got banned. How to say? Remember, I said, you would know the politics were quite different. So that if you did a route without a permit, you either did it as part of the team, and then you and the leader of the team would get penalised. The rest of the team wouldn't, and you would get fined. And the penalised would either be 10 years of banning from climbing in Nepal or 5 years. And depending on how bad that was at that time, that was my understanding, and it seemed consistent because we knew other people who'd done things like that. And if you left the team, and this is, I talked to my liaison officer before I'd gone up because I knew there was major consequences, and I didn't want to impose this problem on Ivan Fiala because this was the only opportunity he got to leave the country because it was occupied by Russia, and he was such a mentor, even though he could speak no English, like 3 words, and he was amazing mentor for me. And so I wrote, you could leave the expedition. And if you left the expedition officially, like you said, the leaders tried to stop you climbing, but you decided to leave the expedition and the leader couldn't stop you climbing. And so you left the expedition, then you would be the one that penalized. This is how it seemed from talking to other people, seeing people in the past, and talking to our liaison officer. So then I wrote a letter declaring that Ivan Fiala, our leader, because he was the official leader, he had the permit, had tried hard to stop me going climbing, but I had disobeyed, if you like, or whatever. And so I left the expedition, and and therefore I was climbing on my own, so that he wouldn't be penalized. This is I'm 27.
You're trying to make this work, but
And Ivan Fiala got this letter translated because it was the one person who could speak Slovak and English there, the doctor. And he looked at me and he goes, no, you are part of the expedition. You go climbing. How was that, man? He was like there for me. And then anyway, so he was going to be in big trouble in Nepal as well. But actually, I think so much else was going on. They didn't bother him too much. And then when I finally got my ban, which came sometime afterwards, I only got 2 years. 2 years. That's like amazing. No one I knew had ever had 2 years. They'd always had 5 or 10 years. And there was all these other little political things, blah, 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 blah. And so I still yeah, I still think I probably would have done roughly the same thing, but basically for decades I had no idea what else I could have done once I got out to the politics, because the New Zealand guys had made official statements that it was not possible that I climbed Everest without oxygen. Oh, I climbed Everest. What else? Oh, so that was a dark time.
Yeah. So what was that? So the dark time was it from achieving your goal? Like, I mean, I certainly had that, like from achieving goals, like, and been like, there's sort of a high, and then it's just like, oh, I don't have a goal now. What the hell do I do with my life?
See, I've never had that. People talk about that. They talk about post-party. When you have a really big party because you've turned 50 or 60 or something, or 40. And there's post-party low or post-expedition low. I've never had that.
Mm-hmm. So it wasn't that.
It wasn't
for
that.
you.
No.
But it was, you were being publicly called a liar. You were having this incredible achievement, sort of, by implications, completely stripped from you. Like, that's not what you did, even though you know that you did it. You were changed by it. How did that change you? Like, how did this dark time change you? Like, did it change your perspective on life, on climbing, on expeditions? Did you learn what lessons came? Like, maybe it's the analogy is going back to the 20-year-old me or the young you on those expeditions, and you weren't seeing what lessons were being offered you at the time, as is so often the case with these, and then later you make meaning out of it, either creatively or objectively. I don't know, but like, what kind of things came from that journey for you?
Lots and lots of things, as you said, quite some time later, and I knew at the time there would be learnings. But at the time for the first couple of years, until quite a few mountaineering researchers, so 3 particular mountaineering researchers did some stories about it, and had talked to people and rung up people and put 2 and 2 together. Then I just had to deal with being the object of sometimes derision. And I didn't publicly stand up and defend it for 2 reasons. Initially, for one reason, and that was because I didn't say to the Ministry of Tourism that I did climb it, because I didn't know what to do, and I was looking at a 10-year ban, and my goal was to go back and climb it. I saw the West Pillar on Makalu, and I just go, I don't know if I could do anything like that, but that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And it was this beautiful mountain, and the sun was setting on it, and it was like, it was just so gorgeous. And I was coming down Everest, and I was like, yes, I want to go there. I've never been there yet, to Makalu. And so I desperately wanted to go back because I was still a climber. And so I didn't want a big ban. That was my biggest thing. And so in order to avoid a big ban, I didn't go around saying I did summit, because I've got these guys who are saying I didn't summit, and I'm in a male-dominated thing. So saying I did summit would then make the Nepali kind of pissed off with me. I didn't say I didn't summit. Far out. I didn't know. The liaison officer was saying what I should say.
Right.
I was on my own. There was nobody to hang out with and talk to in Kathmandu, except my LO was giving me this advice. He said, I think you should say you just went on the wrong route accidentally too high, and just leave it like that. And then everyone cannot have their, be embarrassed.
Yeah, plausible deniability kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
So,
and then, sorry, go. And
I just am reflecting that, I myself, and I'm sure everyone has been in situations where they felt cornered and accused unjustly. And those are definitely not situations where I ever felt I found my best self. And so,
No.
You are actually making what it sounds like really measured decisions. You're like, well, I don't want to publicly stand up because I want to go climb Makalu next year. I don't want to do this because I don't want to make...
Yeah, I don't want a public stand up because a whole lot of guys have said I haven't, or three guys have said I haven't done it, and I'm in a male. So we're not on an even playing, and then that is utterly key. And everyone likes controversy. So, you're sitting in a hotel and 5 telephones are going because there's not the internet, and they're from different countries saying, they say that you're a liar. Did you really? Oh, where's your photo? Now, I've climbed Aoraki Mount Cook by that time about 14 times by different routes, which in New Zealand's highest mountain, I've climbed other mountains, of course, overseas, but, and it's really a significant climb. It's grunty. And how many summit photos had I got? One? We didn't have social media. We didn't necessarily.
Right. It wasn't part of the culture.
And I took my camera and I was really, really careful. And I knew that I was going to be on my own. So I pre-organized everything. And instead of having it around my neck, I put it on a little tripod in my pack. But I'd never frozen my camera before because I'd always had it hanging around my neck. And remember, it's not like millions of people are doing this. Nobody's doing this. I'd never carried a thermos at altitude because it weighs more than a water bottle, and who would carry a thermos? Remember, 1988 thermoses versus these sexy, lightweight new thermoses now. They were a kilo. Why would you carry a kilo of thermos plus your water, and you'd carried water before and it had never frozen, and you'd climbed an alpine-style 8,000 meter peak before, and you'd been at 7,000 meters, 4 days, and you'd never had your water bottle frozen. Maybe I was just lucky, but so I hadn't even got a thermos.
If you've been wondering whether one-on-one coaching is the right next step for your training, this is the month to find out. Sign up for coaching and receive a free 30-minute call with one of our specialists. Visit uphillathlete.com to learn more. Now, back to that show. Interviewed this morning by a German journalist about my experience on the summit of Nanga Parbat, because they're still talking about what Reinhold and Gunther Messner experienced on their summit day in 1970. And what I said to him was, no one can sit in the pub or in their living room and make judgments about what people did or didn't do above 8,000 meters, because it's just a different, you're just so barely surviving. You don't make the same decisions. You don't have the same cognitive abilities. There are super small, unexpected things can have major consequences. You just have so much less energy to do anything. So you conserve that energy so tightly, and, reaching across over here to the right to lend a hand to somebody might be that motion that tips you over the edge because you feel that close to the edge. And, and then people just sit down in their living room and be like, oh, why didn't you reach your hand over to help that person? They were dying. What kind of degenerate are you? That's inhuman. And okay, well, you go up there and do what we were doing, and then you tell me how you would have done it, because it's just not, and I'm not defending or accusing, but I think that, it's interesting how these conversations still happen. And for those people that are listening that have never been to a super altitude, as we're going to call it now, until you've been up there, you just really don't honestly have any business saying what it's like or making judgments on people or what they did or didn't do or could or couldn't have done.
And also, there's no internet. No, it's great. No, it's really great. But also, I'm really proud of the fact that I preempted my camera situation, because I wasn't going to stand there on the summit of Everest
That was
screwing my
smart.
camera onto a tripod.
Yep.
And I didn't have and we didn't do selfies. I never did selfies in those days. Well, anyway, and so
The
I'm
lenses
really
weren't
proud of
wide
that.
enough.
And then basically, I didn't know enough people who'd done this kind of stuff. And so, oh no, probably if you do that and you leave it in your pack, it'll freeze. Because I'd climbed to 8,000 meters. I'd never frozen my camera. It was a really cool, wee, robust, super awesome camera. So I'm proud of that. And that gets turned around and that's my failure. And, for example, and then when I got back down to the South Col, the next day I was resting until midday because it was the old route. And so it wasn't straight down the Geneva Spur. It was up and over the top of the Geneva Spur. And I didn't know if I was going to be strong enough to do the up. I had no idea. When I started walking, I was like, oh, fuck, this is really easy. But anyway, I was kind of nervous for a long time, so I needed to keep drinking. And the Spanish team were leaving. This is the day after. And their Sherpa called in, and he opened the tent, and he leaned in, and he leaned on my goggles, and he broke my goggles, so my goggles had a crack in it. Then I end up going, they were still okay, but they were cracked. And I end up going down, and she was like this, and her goggles were broken. And obviously I hadn't looked after myself. And it's like, wow, I was actually really organized in my tent, and I was super, super proud of everything was ready for me when I got back into my tent. And, all these things that I was proud of. I was dialed, but, things happened. The guy had leaned on my goggles. He'd come right in, put his elbow and lean on my goggles, broken my goggles. I wasn't expecting anyone else to come at my tent, and just things like that.
Yeah. So how does that feel to be, I think that there's two things I want to pick up on. And again, I don't want to make, you be your gender, but I do want to pick up on this thing that you've said a couple of times, that you had 3 well-respected male mountain guides saying that you hadn't done something. You had people turning your successes into your failures. That must have felt horrible. That must have
but it happens to a lot of people. And so I grew up with in my family, my 2-person family, we talked about people, we talked about whys and hows and things like this. So and I knew life wasn't fair. If it was fair, I'd be really good at sports. If it was fair. And so I think, and also I decided that in order for my mental survival, I had to assume that the good will prevail. And I had to trust that. And I just recently gave a presentation.
Where did you get that idea? I mean, honestly, why didn't you think that?
I knew that the good might not prevail. I also knew that I wasn't going to fight it because Rob Hall was way, way, way more savvy with the press than I was. And he was a man. And people want to side with things. And so I knew that even if I'm 100% right, unless I have a photo of the summit, because that's become that was the pinnacle of proof.
That's the only indisputable proof, and you didn't have it.
La-di-da. Well, then I wasn't going to win, even if I had every other bit of proof needed. I wasn't going to win because he's way, way more savvy. So I just pulled inside myself, quietly, and kept real, real low profile, and managed my sleepless nights. And I'm lucky enough I just decided that, the good will prevail in the end, I think.
Who did you have with you? Who did you have around you through that? Did you have anyone?
Oh yeah, I made friends in other worlds, so I would go to, I went to university, and I was always going to go to university. I just hadn't figured out what I wanted to do. And then I wanted to move to the States, and I decided that after spending a couple of years in the States, I wanted to go and live in America. And I knew that becoming a physical therapist by that time would get me entry into America because it was a wanted profession. And so this is why I studied physical therapy, so I could move to the United States. Yeah. So, I was
So
kind of...
you dove into that path headlong, and that was your companion through this
Yeah,
period.
and all the people I met on the way, and
Mm.
and you did other things, and we started rock climbing, and sport climbing had hit New Zealand by then, and then I
Mm.
discovered a rock climbing where I wasn't so scared,
Mm.
and so that was really good for me, and you did small projects.
Mm. But I mean, can we just pause for a minute and say how amazing that is that you turned all of that negativity into something profoundly positive, because you did. And I mean, not everybody could do that. And that's pretty real. That's pretty big.
Well,
You did
it
that for yourself.
smoothed out the wild child a little bit. It was like, okay, maybe there's consequences that I never. One of the things I was lucky enough to grow up with, is that life actually isn't fair, and you can see that because there's people suffering extreme hardship of poverty or war, or abuse within. So life isn't fair, and so you can pretty much, if you push it too much, then life can be. You can make it unfair. And
Mm.
so and I was super lucky. That kept me out of the blame. And actually, this is what I was going to say to you, because I knew we'd be talking about this Everest thing, you see. And the year before, I had this huge adventure, and it turned into an epic with John Muir, who's an Australian climber, and a really amazing person. And we had been in India on the Kedarnaths, and we'd been going to traverse the Kedarnath Dome, Kedarnath Peak, and another knob. And we got caught in a big storm, and of course we didn't have a map because there were no maps. We did have a map, but it only had like 5 lines on it. Those are the kind of
Right.
maps in
I
those
know
days,
those
as you know.
maps.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, there's a ridge. Oh, that matches the ridge, and that's it, like one line.
Yeah.
And people just care. It's just so surreal, isn't it? And so we descended the face of a mountain in a complete storm and a whiteout on day 6. We descended from over 7,000 meters without a rope in big storm, and we got caught in 6 avalanches, and I got buried in a snow cave that collapsed on me in an avalanche. Blah, blah, blah. It was a James Bond day. And then near the end of that day, 16 hours later or something like this, of epicness and nearly dying multiple times, then we ended up finding this little shelter under this little triangular ice cliff, and we were standing there, and yes, another avalanche came down, but it wasn't so big, and we managed to not be buried, and patted down around our feet, and we were quite wet by then, of course, a little bit, and what anyway, so we were just looking and looking and looking at the storm, because that last avalanche wasn't as big as the ones before. So does that mean, of course, is the snow falling less intensely? And I said to John, how long do these storms happen and last in this area? And this is day 2 of the storm. And the day 1 I'd spent vomiting at altitude. And he said, sometime, mostly 2, but I have seen them last 4. And I go, yeah, well, I won't last. Tonight I'll probably just get a bit of cold damage because I'm a bit damp. But I'm not sure, even if we don't get buried, whether I last another 24 hours out in the open, or 36 it would be. And he goes, yeah, I'm pretty much the same, I reckon. And then at that point, and I thought about it a lot later, of course, and this is a really, really momentous moment of learning, is that we didn't have that much personal energy left, not gas in the stove, and gas in our bodies. And then he didn't complain that he was there. And I didn't complain that I was here. And because we got ourselves there. And so nowadays we would say we didn't assume blame culture. We didn't buy into blame culture. It wasn't somebody else's fault. It wasn't the storm's fault. And we weren't innocent. We'd gone and plodded our way along the ridge and then got caught in a storm and then descended a mountain that we'd never seen before without a rope, and it's really steep, and got caught in avalanches. We'd done that. And yes, it wasn't fair, but life isn't fair, and that's the beauty of it. And that's why great art is created and all this kind of stuff, because it's mutating left and right, and that's not fair. And because we didn't complain, we didn't drag each other down. And you would have had these experiences so many times, Steve. And therefore we were able to harness the third of Lydia that was left and the third of John that was left. And that's 2/3 of a person. And that got us down. And I took that and I came away from that, and I got PTSD and stared at a wall for 2 days without talking after that, because, it was so traumatic.
Near death is one of the most severe traumas you can experience.
Yeah.
I mean, full stop. I mean,
multiple times. And, but then I went on to climb on the Gasherbrum straight away, and la-di-da. But because I was young and motivated and optimistic.
And because when you're young, you can sweep the trauma under the rug, because the rug isn't it's not bulging with trauma yet. There's still relatively little trauma dust under there, so there's room for more. When you get older, there's a lot more trauma dust under that rug, and it's harder to sweep it under. But yeah,
it's a really good analogy. But I think the rug is the adventure, and underneath is the trauma dust. And so there's another adventure, And,
just throw another adventure over the trauma dust. Flatten it out a little bit, stomp on it.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. But I realized I had the resource to climb. By that time, I wanted to have a go on Mount Everest, but no, there wasn't an expedition yet. But I go, or an 8,000 meter peak, because that's what I was going to. I had the resource to climb to 8,000 because I had the resource to harness everything of mine, and I was a human, and other humans had done it. So that took me it took me away from blaming. Because I realized the power, if you accept responsibility. So this is what I say sometimes in corporate presentations or inspirational talks, is if you teach your child or you teach yourself that the bad things that happen to you are somebody else's fault, it's their fault, therefore I'll sue them, so to speak, then logically, most of the good things that happen to you are also somebody else's fault. So therefore, you take away your advocacy, you take away your own empowerment,
your own agency,
create more good things, your own agency, because it's somebody else is
doing all the things to you. Yeah,
exactly. They're doing all the things to you. And so no wonder our teenagers are really stressed, because we've brought them up in a world of blame culture. Hello?
Can we go back to that, what you said? Because I agree wholeheartedly with this, but what you said that you said you took that knowledge that you gained from this epic on Kedarnath, and that's a mountain in the Indian Himalaya. You took that and you turned it into this knowledge, as you said, that you could dig really deep. And
but that took years.
But did it, or was it available on Gasherbrum immediately after?
No, okay. It was available optimistically on Gasherbrum, and I had a ball, and I climbed with these basques, and we did it alpine style in the end. And then, you went straight over and did this other thing, like, maybe there's some slow and some fast thinking here. Maybe there was some subconscious, like, this is hard, but I'm tough. I can endure, and I'm human, and they're human. Like, if they can do it, why can't I do it? I mean, that's, I think, honestly, one of the most powerful things that you can say to yourself in almost any
human endeavor, right? Like, and I've certainly said it to myself, like, and we've also all marveled at the pioneers, like, wow, these guys climbed this mountain 100 years ago with, hobnail boots. And, we've all had these conversations with our mates in the mountains, right? And it's a combination. I think the real conversation there is one of, would we have been able to do that had we had only the resources, the limited resources and knowledge that they had? And, aren't we lucky to live in this time where we have, incredible steel crampons that stay sharp for days and GPS instead of, blank maps and, these kinds of things. I mean, I think that's really a gem of an insight. I think that you learned that, but you had to learn that through six avalanche burials or whatever it was. I lost count, and this complete epic. And is there another way to learn that?
Oh, yeah. I'm sure there is. But,
is there though? Is there really?
I don't know. I mean, perhaps some people are, maybe, you do learn some things when you grow up in your family. And perhaps if your parents, you say, you've got, how old are your sons, Steve?
5 and 8 right now.
Okay. Well, you'll be talking to them and they'll be hearing conversations like this. That goes into their DNA.
For sure.
They'll come away, they'll see how their parents think and react, and they'll come away with knowledge. And, if they've got climbing, skiing parents, they'll come away with the experience of knowing how to climb and ski, but also how to think. It's the biggest present that we can give people, and they don't have to be our own children, but
they're often better not to be, I'd say.
And if you've grown up in a house where people think about how people think, and I think that's probably what I did. I probably grew up in a house where my mother taught me to think how people think and how do you think. And so this isn't going so well. I'm feeling like shit. Is there another way to think about this? Is there another approach? And possibly retrospectively, decades later, I can philosophize about it. But basically, post-Everest drama was shit to go through. Excuse the language. Sorry, I should not that said that. But it wasn't very nice. But I'm very lucky that biochemically I didn't stay down, if you like.
Yeah, that's a good point of differentiation. So I mean, I imagine you often get asked, what advice would you give to young women climbers trying to find their way into the mountains and this kind of thing? But I actually want to ask you what you would say, and you brought up my sons, what would you say to both old guys like me, but also the younger, boys or the younger generation, but maybe more me, like, looking back at the chauvinism in the sport and, acknowledging that I don't want it to be like that anymore. Sort of what can I do? Like, what is the answer to that? Like, what would you say to me or my generation or other people that are going through, you used the reference of #MeToo. For me, that was very profound to realize just the extent of that kind of behavior. It's like all of a sudden everyone I knew was coming forward with these stories, and I'd been blissfully unaware. And yeah, how do we do better?
The immediate advice that I give female people, female alpinists, if you like, is not to carry really heavy loads, not to trash themselves, because women are finer. Our joints are sloppier. Our joints per body weight are smaller. We have, 12 to 24% fewer red blood cells per body, per volume of red blood, and the red blood cells last way less time than the men's blood cells, as they go through the body, and for the same body weight, if you and I are the same body weight, you'll have up to 40% more muscle mass than me, blah, 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 all of that kind of stuff. Men are machines. Lots of women are as strong or stronger than men, but if you plotted the normal curve. So don't wear yourself out carrying huge loads just to be melt more snow.
Melt more snow.
Work it. Melt more snow. Carry light packs. Spend the money on packs that trash out. We didn't have the option of light packs. We had big, heavy canvas packs back in the day. But, the next generation will have different gear as well. Now we have 100-gram harnesses.
Yeah.
Or no, less than 100-gram harnesses. Look at our harnesses in the olden days. And so on and so forth. So that's an immediate thing. And as far as all genders, then I think the best thing you can do is if you bring people up non-ageist, if the young people end up having to sit at the table, eat the adult food, not get their little precious meals cooked for them differently, they have to eat adult food. They are treated like young people, and their opinions are respected for people of that age and that experience, and they're listened to. They're listened to at the table, and they have to listen to other people. Then and they're encouraged with curiosity, and they can have a conversation with somebody who, like an older woman, and they're just having a conversation with another person. Then you're not going to have a problem. Because then you have this intrinsic respect for humanity, and gender differences become less of an issue. The other thing is that life isn't fair. And you can do the best with what you have, and you can't always do the best. You have to give yourself some slack, because, insecure overachievers tend to always want to do their best, don't they?
Yeah, I laughed out loud when I read that you described yourself as an insecure overachiever somewhere in my research, because I've used that term for myself. And I learned that term from a friend of mine who has done this in a very different way, where he has, I think he's started something in the order of 12 tech companies. He's sold 7 of them. He's probably a self-made billionaire. And he's like a total unassuming guy. Just he's not, you would look at him and never think that he's wealthy, because in his mind, he's not. He's an insecure overachiever, and there's something in him that is making him just prove himself over and over and over again to someone. And he doesn't really even need to reflect on it or figure it out, but it's working for him. And that, is something that I've marveled at, because I think that's largely what drove me. It sounds like it was a similar thing for you, whether that's related to the wild child, and you're nodding. But, there's also these people that do it out of the pure love of it, right? And they're just balanced and healthy emotionally, and they have love for it, and they have enthusiasm for it, and they're also incredibly successful. And and life isn't fair. Right?
Yeah. I know, but they don't. I think actually most high achievers have sleepless nights. They may not have sleepless nights going, oh, what will people think of me? And that was a relatively, but they will have sleepless nights about doing their best because they want to, not necessarily because they're driven from competitiveness. They could be driven something else. And I also think that you and I and a lot of people, just because you're an insecure overachiever, doesn't mean that you're not passionate about nature and you're passionate about the experiences that you have in these beautiful places, and you're not passionate about people. I mean, you're so passionate, you have a podcast where you talk to a whole lot of different people, because it feeds your curiosity about how people's minds work.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome.
This is entirely a creative project for me that doesn't really have any meaning or doesn't necessarily benefit the uphill athlete business model in any way. It's just something I have to do because I want to find out. I want to talk to you and I want to talk to these other people. And I have this thesis that when I was young, I was so driven to achieve, and it didn't matter if there was a future to it. And one of the things that I've experienced in my life is having lost a lot of really dear friends, and mostly to the mountains, but also to cancer and other things. And especially the ones that I lost to climbing, I always felt like, man, I wish that they had seen how much good work there was still left to do for them, because most of them were honestly quite young. They're in their 20s and 30s. The occasional one was 40, or, Mug Stump was 42. Right? I mean, imagine what Muggs would be like today, right? Like he was a walking prophet 30 years ago. Like, imagine if he was alive today and what he would have to say to us, right? Like, but I don't think that there would be. So I guess what my thesis with some of this inquiry is to actually create something that hopefully will stand the test of time, and young people will listen to and hear you and hear me and hear others and think, yeah, okay, I want, that's real wisdom. That's a life worth living. And I want to have that part too. I want to have that wisdom that is earned when I'm in my 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and maybe 90s. That would be something that would be a legacy, right? To really leave behind, to show people that that's possible.
Okay, so it's really interesting. And when you're saying that, I'm going, well, maybe if young people realize, if they're not sexist and ageist, so to speak, and they're sitting in base camp or they're sitting around the dinner table, actually listening, not all the time, just they can engage, then they'll have this. They will grow more of the value. But there's so much, you've got to learn so much when you're young. I mean, it's just you've got to learn how to hold a spoon when you're really young, and then after that it's kind of like an adult version of the same thing, isn't it, really? Learning how to hold a
file a tax return.
Yeah, file a tax return. And until you learn that you can pay someone else to do it, whatever. But when we come to mentors, if we look at mentorship, I strongly believe that mentorship goes both ways. So the classic white middle class model of mentorship is the older person being a mentor to the younger person. Now, in Māori philosophy or Māori culture, they have a taina and tukana, and that is the mentor and the mentee, and that can switch in an hour into reverse. So they have the belief that a young person can mentor an older person and an old person can mentor a younger person. It just depends on what you're talking about. If we brought this philosophy more, then the young person sitting at the table or in base camp or something would see the benefit of being older, because there's more mutual respect. Therefore, that you would know that when you're older, you can still keep learning. There's it's just a binary system. It's just like you learn and you teach, and you teach and you learn, and it should be non-ageist. And therefore, then you open the door more to the reason why you may as well live a bit longer, because you can keep learning. It's more interesting. When you're young, being old is really uninteresting.
When I was a boy, I was really into the Boy Scouts. And one of the things that I learned in the Scouts was that, I would go through these things of having to learn these tasks or whatever, like camping or something, first aid or something. And then shortly after that, I would have to teach it. And I actually didn't know it until I taught it. And I was like, I learned that really young. And I was like, okay, so that's how this works. Okay. I learned the basics, and then there's some time passes. Maybe I do a little practice, and then I'm going to have to teach someone else. So then that's when I actually go and bone up and like really like fill in the gaps. And after I've done that for a while, then I actually know it. And I mean, even guiding is that way, right? Like, I mean, I think teaching ice climbing helped my ice climbing so much.
Yes, absolutely. But that requires hard work, and and hard work. Even the term hard work is often said with, "Oh, that's hard work," as opposed to, "Oh, wow, some hard work." We don't celebrate the skill of embracing hard work. The actual knowledge that, that's okay, that's hard work. Oh, sometimes it's not that pleasant, and sometimes it's hard, but I can do it. And sometimes just because it's hard doesn't mean it's fun. Not fun, I should say, or fun. So, and it's like when we talk about the word consequence, oh my God, that's a really consequential decision. Yeah, but actually there's good consequences too. The consequence of doing exercise is that you get fitter. The consequence of eating healthy food is that you get more healthy. The consequence of learning something is that you know it at the end. So there's these, we backload these terms which are really important for life. A real life, not a protected little bubble in a built environment. We need to load these terms with positivity as well as negativity.
I love that. Yeah. And real life, and not in protected bubbles. Yes. More of that, please.
Years ago, I was doing a keynote for a big conference in New Zealand with a whole lot of scientists that had come over for it was movement and or ergonomics in extreme environment. And so I was talking to this professor of physical science in one of the universities in New Zealand, and I was talking about extreme environments, and he interrupted me and he said, Lydia, and this has stayed with me forever. He said, I actually think that the built environment is now one of the most extreme environments that we subject ourselves to. And that stuck with me. You don't trigger by a whole lot of development inside the brain if you live in a straight, flat, organized environment. You don't do this, you don't do that. There's no consequence to things. You're not going to break your leg and then die, if you like, or something like that. So yes, the built environment is a really extreme environment.
Yeah. So at the outset of this project, I knew, as I said before, that I was going to call on those of us that have spent, 4, 5, 6 decades in the mountains to help us work towards what I hope to be sort of a philosophy of the mountains. And, you're currently 62 years old. You've done big wall, first ascents, and first female ascents. You're the first woman to climb an 8,000 meter peak in alpine style. You're the first woman to climb Everest without supplemental oxygen. You've guided Everest a bunch of times. You're a physiotherapist. You're an IFMJ certified guide, and you still are guiding and climbing actively. You've written an incredible book. How do you want to be remembered?
It's funny. As positive and as good company, I guess. But that's as somebody would like to have as their friend. There's your insecurity. There's the insecurity. Oh, no, Not really. I just think, how would that's an interesting question. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be from insecurity, though. I mean, like that's I think your inner critic talking there, but that's quite I mean, frankly, like that's being good company. That's not a small feat, right? Like that's something that you might say offhand and it might sound light and might sound insignificant at first, but if you think about it, I immediately think of like a Winston Churchill type character that would, have like his brandy glass and like just be like telling you these incredibly clever, witty, and subtle jokes and talking about the war, the stories, like all the things, kind of making fun of everything, but in a very a way that enlightens and enlivens conversation. I mean, that's a fine goal, I think. I mean, that's a very, very human, fine goal.
I think too, I want to die knowing that I used as much of my brain power as I can. I think I'm reasonably smart, but I think I try to use as much of my brain as I can. So I like these conversations. But just recently I went to a play. I went to a play last week, and the actor, it was a single person play, just phenomenal. And the actor came out afterwards and did a Q&A, and he was speaking about the bringing a Japanese no theatre in, and where the Greek philosophy of theatres, and he was just bringing it in. And I'm going, I am in the presence of a great teacher, not a good teacher, but a great teacher. And do you know this? That's what I felt like when I was hanging out with the Slovaks on Everest, but I couldn't verbalize it as well. Peter is not a good teacher; he's a great teacher, and this ability to engage with the world, not to waste your life. You don't have to go and climb mountains, but just engage to the world, care and learn and grow and develop ideas. And I'm sure that if we meet again, let's have a great conversation. Yeah.
I mean, I think you are a great teacher, Lydia. I mean, I think that you owe it to yourself, and I'm sure everyone listening to this conversation today will agree that you should own that, because you are that, and I think that this is one of the great beauties of the mountain experience, is how it can take you from just to use abstractions, single child of a single mother somewhere in New Zealand, who had a chip on her shoulder and was a wild child and went to Alaska and climbed big walls in Yosemite and climbed Mount Everest and was called a liar for not having the right photo, and all of the things that you went through, and learned through all of those things how to manage it, right? Like, it's a little bit like, I think what makes great humans is doing hard things, and finding, it's that, I mean, I think I could ask this question about Everest. Like, were you the person that could climb Everest before you climbed it? Or were you only the person who could climb Everest after you climbed it?
During, actually.
During. Yeah. But were you already that person, and then you just had to manifest it and put one foot in front of the other? Or could it not happen until you actually went through the action?
No, I think when you do really hard things, maybe you realize just before, because it's only till just before, if they're really hard, that you've gained enough experience. Just say if you were a dancer and you were doing a really, really challenging solo piece, then it's the build up. Or you go to the Olympics, they talk about the build up. So essentially you're the person who can do that solo piece or win a medal or just do really well. You're pushing to that moment. That's what doing something new is. So it's just before you do it that you become the person who can do it, just before. Yeah. And I think that gives
Totally
you the
agree.
confidence, that gives you that sort of, okay, I'm ready. Oh, I don't know if I'm ready, but I think I'm ready,
Or let's find out if I'm ready.
Yeah, let's find out if I'm ready.
Yeah. And then let the cards fall where they may, and then come back and say, okay, I was ready or wasn't ready. Let's try again, or not try again, or change the objective. I think that approach to life, but also to, personal development, organizational development, there's just so many ways to apply that. When I'm, internally with Uphill Athlete, and I tell my colleagues this, like, everything's a test. And it's not a pass or fail. It's a, where are you strong, and where do you need help? Where do you need assistance, and how, and can I assist you in those areas? And if I can't, who can? And do we have somebody in our team that can, or do we have to go find somebody outside of our team that can, and let's just keep having this conversation about how we're all doing in these continual tests. And it's like I tell them, like, basically we're on a cycle where we do there's a major test every 3 to 4 months. And then we take a little break and then we do something hard again. And, and then we talk about it. We observe ourselves, we observe one another, we give feedback. And, in the mountains, the feedback loop is much more personal. It's with yourself, right? It's your feeling. Like, I'm feeling good today, I'm feeling bad today. Like, I feel strong, that kind of thing. In team environments, the feedback loop is, your colleague saying, like, this sucks. This copy you wrote is terrible. I don't like it. I don't know why, but can you try again, or whatever it is, right? Like, but in a compassionate way. Maybe that's not the good example, but
yeah, they're all good. And I think I was going to say at the beginning of when you just started speaking, I was thinking that we're talking. You're saying, did you become the person who could climb it before, during, or after? And that really is focusing on the end goal. And I think in order to help people on the passage, we need to celebrate what already exists, and that's the journey more. So if you say, not only will you be challenged, you'll be getting fitter along the way, but in order to achieve that, you've connected one of your clients on Uphill Athlete with, say, a psychologist, a sports psychologist. And then it's not just getting the information you need to try to get better at doing your exercises, which would be what I need, from that sports psychologist. You're also having the experience of spending time with this psychologist. So I am listening to you speak going, this is a cool experience, spending time talking to Steve House. I'm so lucky, because we can talk about philosophy and ideas. And it's really interesting. And I really hope that we do meet again soon, because it'll be fun and funny. And yeah. And so there's 2 layers. And so that then reinforces the fact that it's the journey that gets us to the goal that what we are really relishing.
And I mean, you've done this, I'm sure, 1,000 times as a mountain guide, but we do this every day with Uphill Athlete too, where people come to us and they say, I want to achieve the goal. I want to climb Everest, or whatever the goal happens to be. I want to run this race. And what I know and what you know is that it's not the goal, it's the becoming the person that can do those things. And it's a process. Like you said in the beginning, you talked about the person that could show up and do the basic things consistently well without making a big fuss out of them, show up with sharp crampons, goggles that are at least at the beginning not cracked and not scratched, boots that fit, whatever the thing is, right? And have all that sorted, be sorted, and then you can work on the other things. And
absolutely.
It's the
then
becoming.
You can put risk. That's when you, instead of having risk that your goggles are going to break properly because they've got a crack, and lots of scratches on your goggles that then ice up, so you cannot see in a whiteout. You can't see in a whiteout. You fall off.
Yeah.
And so, but if you're going to take that risk, if you're going to take a unit of, say, 8 out of 10 risk or 4 out of 10 risk, whatever risk profile you want, then put it at the top end. Don't waste your risk taking because you got scratched goggles. Sort that out. That's a really boring place to take risk. Make it fun. I mean, it's really cool to turn up with good goggles because you've got a unit of lemons that you can absorb or whatever people want to do when they talk about risk profiles. Right. You've got a unit of risk that you're allowed to take before you die. Don't waste it on crap goggles. Boring.
Yeah.
It's it's making life fun. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned how you would like to be, I asked you how you'd like to be remembered. And I'm going to ask you another really hard question. What is your dream at this point?
Oh, that's easy. My joints are wearing out, and my dream is to, a dream, and I'm not sure we'll see because I am older. I'd like to climb another 8,000er for sure. I'd love to. And I need to, my dream would be to just, I do have a quite not very good knees, and I've got one particular knee one of my two knees, and that's not very good. So that would be it's a real practical, in your face, come on, Lydia, things are really happening.
So a new knee, I get a new knee and climb another 8,000er.
Yeah, something like that. I do love expedition life, and I do love guiding at altitude, and and a dream. Well, that would be kind of a practical dream. I don't necessarily. I'm not sure if I can get how much I can get out of my knee, but just that's kind of managing it creatively and not missing out too much, because I have the time scale of my age and I hope that I can keep going high for a little bit longer. I've no idea. I haven't been to 8,000. I've been to 7,000 each year, but not to 8 since my last Everest in 2019. Then we had COVID, and New Zealand closed down. It was pretty hard. It was too hard to get back in, so I couldn't. And so those are sort of practical dreams, and I want to, there's other career.
Say the crazy thing.
I really like to start to make some films. I think I made a little film last year. I don't own it, but it was my idea, and I was in it.
We'll link to it in the show notes because I've watched it. It's really great.
Oh, do you like it?
I do, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just been released. I mean, it's only been on YouTube at least a couple of weeks.
I didn't even know
it
was on. This is Te Ara the Path.
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah. And so and part of that is exploring how people think. It's exactly what we're doing here. We're exploring how people think who have had significant events in their life. That's your whole thing. How have these events changed you? How do you think now? What did you think before? That's your big question of this whole podcast. That's what 100%. I'd love to do. Yeah, it's so exciting. The mind is so exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have a lot to share about that. I think that's a great dream. I can't wait to I'm sure we'll talk again before, I have a feeling. And I can't wait to see what happens with that. I think that you'll make that happen.
Well, it's a dream, but I'm also not, I'm not living in Europe and I'm not living in America where alpinism is a culture and where there's more money, and I'm not the current hot chick doing super hard ice climbs. Just all that kind of stuff. I'm just I'm just a sort of
No. Don't. You're not allowed to say that here. You're not just an anything. You're incredible. And, this goes back to, the pioneer piece that I mentioned before, how I'm fascinated with people. And there's a saying, pioneers get arrows, settlers get land. Have you ever heard that? And
pioneers get what?
Arrows.
Arrows.
Pioneers get arrows, settlers get land. And, you've been a pioneer, whether, in so many ways. And, it's in you, it's who you are, it's in your identity. It's just how you show up in the world. And it's amazing. And that's the kind of, that's what we need more of. That's why, if you don't do it for yourself, do it for the pioneering aspect, that you're like opening a trail that other people can be 62 and have done all these amazing things and still like have big, amazing things left that you want to do and that you will do. And because you will become the person that can do it in the act of doing it or trying to do it. Right. To bring it full circle, right? Like that's because you've done it. You've done all these other things before. So why can't you do that too? Like there's no reason you can't do that too. Zero.
You should have a company that inspires people to. I'm just joking.
No,
that's true. There you go.
But you've done all of that, and I want you to. If I can offer you anything today, in exchange for you being here and having these conversations, it would just be that I see you and I see how amazing you are, and I'm so happy to have had this chance to connect with you and have this conversation and share these ideas. And I think our listeners will also appreciate it really a lot. How can our listeners find you or connect you in the ever-present digital world?
Oh, Instagram, Lydia Bradey.
There you go.
They can message me that way, or and I think I think that's Instagram or Facebook, or I think my email is pretty visible, findable.
Yeah. Instagram and Facebook are always good. You're out there, and we'll try to link to you in the show notes. Thank you so much, Lydia. Thanks to our listeners for tuning in. Do not forget to click the subscribe button to the Uphill Athlete podcast for more inspiring conversations like this one. Until next time, remember Lydia's words, the uphill is easy. Everything we publish, the articles, new podcast episodes, and the live webinars are announced first in our newsletter. You can elect to receive between 1 and 3 newsletters a month, written by myself and the coaching team. And if you want them, sign up at uphillathlete.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.